Well, hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with Benedict Rogers, an interview series produced by Hong Kong Watch. And it's a great pleasure to welcome as our guest this week, Sam Cooper. Sam is the author of a best-selling book, which I have here, called Wilful Blindness, How a Network of Narcos, Tycoons and CCP Agents Infiltrated the West. And Wilful Blindness was first published last year, but it's just been updated and re-released this month, I believe. And Sam is also an award-winning Canadian investigative journalist. He's presented his findings to law enforcement agencies, legal and financial professionals, and academics around the world. And Sam, I believe you work for Global News based in Ottawa.
Yes, I'm based in Ottawa with the National Investigations Team for Global News.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And let me start just with a fairly broad question. Tell us what the central message of Willful Blindness is and why you wrote the book.
The central message is there is indeed willful blindness, which essentially, as you and your listeners will know, is a legal concept where people in power for ulterior motives ignore very serious corruption or criminality, and to the detriment of the public. And in my case, I found through years of research that very similar to the way that Russia has dominated its former post-Soviet states near it and now is engaged in a war, Russia's security services, states worked with organized crime to pave the trail through underground trading, money laundering, criminality. That is how they capture or attack other states. And I found that in the case of Canada, a very powerful network had emerged from the Chinese Communist Party, led from Beijing, using all kinds of tools, criminal, legal, illegal, meshing them together in something called the United Front Work Department, and is using this economic really weapon, a political weapon, to infiltrate other countries. And what I found was that this connects directly to the drug trade and fentanyl and heroin overdose epidemics in Canadian cities, especially Vancouver. So really, I combined, or my research found that the highest level criminality in the world emerges from China and is guided by state actors. And really, that's the high level thesis of the book, with the concept that many powerful Canadians have benefited and been captured and have turned a blind eye. At best, at worst, have been directly corrupted through means that I'm still learning about.
Mm. That's really shocking. You've, as I said in the introduction, you've now produced an updated version of the book, and just come out this month. What's new in the new edition, and why did you feel the need to update it?
The new edition, there are 2 or 3 things going on. One of them was that this British Columbia anti-money laundering inquiry had just wrapped up and released its findings, and this was an inquiry that looked into essentially what is known as the Vancouver model of transnational money laundering, how Canadian West Coast casinos and real estate are used by Chinese transnational crime, working with Mexican, Colombian cartels, Iranian cartels, to use that province of Canada just as a clearinghouse of vast underground banking. So I wanted to update with what is known, what was covered in that inquiry, and what they missed. I also needed to update that I had been learned, as I tell the readers in the opening paragraphs of the chapters, that after Willful Blindness was released last May, soon after, I received an alert from Canadian intelligence that I and the publisher were now subjects of Chinese intelligence gathering in Canada, because they wanted to try to find out the impact of the book and whether I was sponsored or connected to any of the groups that China or Beijing, the party, calls the Five Poisons. And so I opened the book with that information. I delved into and revealed that the very same intelligence networks now very interested and focused on my work similarly had attacked Canada's last federal election, specifically targeting the opposition Conservative Party in very concerning disinformation attacks using WeChat. And the last part is I dug deeper into, I know you're interested in Hong Kong. I looked deeper into some highly concerning international and Canadian banking connections to Hong Kong that were uncovered, well, a little bit uncovered in this BC money laundering inquiry. And I explained how that ties into what I'm learning about this, what is called the company, a high-level Chinese transnational state-sponsored cartel that combines the leaders of Hong Kong and Southern China triads with Northern China state bosses. And so I revealed more about that network. And in a nutshell, it is so powerful because it's directed and guided and sometimes includes criminals who are first intelligence and police officials and really are given carte blanche to become the biggest gangsters in the world, to both enrich themselves and fulfill the party's ends.
Mm. Well, thank you. I mean, I read the book when it first came out last year, and I read the new chapter just last night, and it is indeed really powerful and shocking. And we'll come on to some of the things you've just mentioned during the course of the conversation. But I wanted, as you rightly say, obviously, Hong Kong Watch's primary interest is Hong Kong, although we're always interested in the wider China picture, of course. But I wanted to come to some of the connections with Hong Kong, and particularly to start with what you found about the legacy of the Fujian crime lord Lai Changxing, and the links between him and the attack in Yuen Long in Hong Kong on the 21st of July 2019, which of course was one of the most shocking incidents in the 2019 protest movement. Could you say a bit more about that and the Black Gold report and what that reveals?
Yes, this is a case where I find my method is looking at the Canadian crime that I uncovered, chasing or trying to hook the biggest fish, because when you've hooked the biggest fish in China's system, in the crime side, you will discover the state actor connections. And Lai Changxing, as you know, his career in Fujian was so powerfully lucrative and corrupt that in his own testimony in Canada, he says the security services said, "You're getting too big in Fujian, and you should go over to Hong Kong and report on the democracy activists, report on Taiwanese military intelligence." And so he did, as he admitted to a Canadian judge. And then for some reason, he for lack of a word, upset people in the Politburo with another corruption scandal. And then he ran to Vancouver, where he again got involved in his underground casino, narco activity, indications of illegal casinos, and everything that occurs there, which could involve corruption of local officials. And so I wrote very deeply about Lai and how he connected so well in case studies the state activity and the criminal activity. The book came out, and then someone from the United Kingdom in a think tank contacted me and said, "Wow, very well founded and excellent research. Have you seen this Black Gold study?" And of course, I knew about all of the open source, a lot of community-based reports about what happened in the attack in 2019 in Yuen Long. And but I didn't know that who was behind that were successors to Lai, who of course we don't quite know if he's dead or alive now in China, but his successors from Fujian similarly had moved over to Hong Kong And the Black Gold report says this network is not only involved in running, as the name suggests, black market oil into North Korea, which would appear to be a sort of a state-sponsored backdoor activity that Beijing would ask or enable criminals to do, so they have some deniability. But these Fujian thug networks were directly involved in commanding and controlling the attacks on the democracy activists during the ructions of 2019, the report says. And as a great open source report, it connects these crime bosses to detailed United Front Work Department networks. So in a nutshell, this was a revelation for me, and some information needed to be added in the update chapter. And another great source of corroboration, where something that I was seeing as I write in Vancouver and Toronto, something very confusing to the Canadian mind, that we see thugs that appear to be involved in casino crime involved in counter protests against democracy activists. We saw that in Canada in 2019. And so here, of course, now is the mirror in Hong Kong and the very well documented United Front thug connections.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I wanted to come on to the incident in Canada that really stood out to me in the book. You detail a shocking incident of intimidation of Hong Kongers gathering at the 10th Church in Vancouver, just near the City Hall in Vancouver in August 2019. And they had previously held a protest outside the Chinese consulate in Vancouver. Tell us more about that, and again, the connections with the criminal thugs and their links with the party in that regard.
Yes, we saw these events in Toronto and Vancouver, where in some cases the Hong Kong Canadians were representing for democracy and their fears and concerns of what were happening in Hong Kong. And there were even news reports that on the other side we would see these supercars, cars like Ferraris or McLarens or Bentleys with young pro-Beijing students on the other side. So that is one thing. You wonder who those people are and why and how they get there. But in Vancouver, video was captured of about 100 red flag waving pro-Beijing nationalists surrounding this church, where elderly Hong Kong Canadians were praying for peace. The Vancouver police had to attend and escort the Hong Kong Canadians to safety. Video showed the pro-Beijing nationalists taking their pictures. So of course there was the fear that these pictures would go straight to the Chinese consulate, perhaps directly to China, arising the fear of the Canadians that their relatives in Hong Kong would now be targeted. But as you indicate, what really caught my interest was I recognized in the crowd leaders who I had seen in other reports, Mandarin language and photos, meeting with what I knew from my Canadian police and intelligence sources to be an extremely feared People's Liberation Army veteran, who is believed to be the most feared or respected Chinese man on Canadian soil, and is believed to be representing both security and intelligence and the highest levels of organized crime. And I had the records showing this individual in very connected to the casino money laundering networks, which, as I cover in the new chapter, are believed to be connected to high-level triads, which have Hong Kong presence, and Chinese state actors. So it's known as, quote unquote, the company. This is state-sponsored triad activity that connects fentanyl dealers, underground bankers, and state actors in China. So once I saw, the connections of the people leading this attack on a Canadian church, an attack on Hong Kong Canadians expressing their freedom of religion, freedom of expression, I knew that this had to be exposed. And you're right, it gave me an extra motivation that as the people inside that church told me, they had not one Canadian politician stood up and said, what's going on here? We need to not only investigate this, but why would you not attend the consulate in Vancouver and say, look, these people outside the church doors, we have these photographs of you meeting with them frequently. Some of them have criminal connections, and nothing happened. So I had to write about it.
That's extraordinary. You've also identified others from the casino criminal underworld, particularly in British Columbia, who've been involved in targeting other both Hong Kong activists and Uyghur activists. Could you say more about that?
Yes, there are meetings that occur sometimes in front of Vancouver, public squares, the art gallery, sometimes the consulate, sometimes City Hall, where a very similar situation, democracy or Uyghur activists will attend. They will put their message out, and then very strangely, people that I found to be in documented connections to the high-level international criminal underground bank at the center of this Vancouver model casino money laundering, the people that would show up and counter them, I could show the connections. In the case of a Uyghur, I'll give you a scoop here. Here's a story that hasn't even been written. A woman was protesting in front of the Chinese consulate on Granville Street in Vancouver. On her Facebook page, she put up a photo and an account and said, this man approached me and started shouting at me to leave, spit at me, abused me with derogatory names. And that was her account. She didn't know who he was. I read the name of the business on the side of the van, and this would appear to be very bad tradecraft, but I found that the business was directly connected in a business relationship to this transnational underground bank. So how did that person get there in a busy street in Midtown Vancouver so quickly? Was it an accident? Were they tasked? Were they just one of these, hot-headed Beijing nationalists that saw something on social media and went there themselves? Was it an accidental driving trip? I don't think so. Or did someone connected to the consulate send them? Very interesting.
Very interesting indeed. That leads to other questions of the CCP's campaign of influence, infiltration and intimidation in Canada, particularly in Canada's own democratic political system. And you alluded to this earlier. You described the case in particular of the former Member of Parliament, Kenny Chiu, who's a friend of mine as well. I know him well. Of course, he went to Hong Kong as part of the election observation mission for the district council elections in 2019. But could you say a bit about the significance of his experience?
Yes, this is just a stunning case. As Canadians, we look south of the border, and the revelations about the Russian infiltration and interference into presidential election and possible favoring of a candidate, Mr. Trump. But we don't have much, unfortunately, regard or mental energy to look at what happened in the 2021 Canadian federal election. And yes, Kenny Chiu had proposed a private member's bill to fill a massive gap in Canada, and that is that we have no Foreign Agent Registration Act. Of course, the United States and Australia, soon the United Kingdom, will have measures that if you are under the table or in an undisclosed way promoting, working for, lobbying for a foreign government, you would have to disclose that activity. And what we know in Canada is not only China, of course, by orders of magnitude, has the most amount of secret agents and Canadian elites working for them under the table, but also, of course, Russia, Iran, North Korea, even some of the friendly countries. And so this act that Mr. Chiu proposed would start to would get the wheels rolling on providing some of that transparency that the experts like former ambassador to China David Mulrooney say is so needed. A very reasonable bill, and for his efforts to protect Canada, he was smeared in WeChat disinformation campaigns that said this was specifically targeting China. It was anti-Asian racism. He was against his fellow Chinese ethnicity Canadians. And this was just the worst sort of lies. But he, who was positioned to win his riding very easily, he ended up losing in Richmond, a very high population Chinese Canadian ethnicity riding. And it was not only him, another Chinese Canadian leader of the Conservative Party lost her riding. And the Conservative Party believes that in total, 12 to 13 ridings across Canada, mostly in the Vancouver and Toronto, Ontario area, were similarly targeted by a Chinese state activity that included these WeChat campaigns, but also appears to have included other activity. And I can tell you that multiple independent reports have said this is a clear Chinese state interference and covert activity targeting one party in Canada's election. And it's not claimed that the Liberal party, that the sitting power won based on this, but it's certainly claimed by independent reports and experts that China, it impacted a number of ridings. And I can tell you also that there's no indication that the Canadian government is responding to this activity with any countermeasures. And on the other side of that, I can just say that I know from Canadian intelligence, they're deeply concerned about who was involved and what to do about it, but there's no action plan.
Mm. So yet another shocking piece of this picture. Turning from one shocking piece to another, you mentioned earlier the banks, the money laundering, and you say in the book that the Canadian police service knows that some financial institutions in Hong Kong are illegally wiring funds into Canadian banks, but nothing's been done about it. Could you say a bit more about this? Because I think for our viewers and listeners who are either from Hong Kong or follow Hong Kong very closely, they will know that HSBC, for example, has frozen, at the instigation of the authorities, frozen the bank accounts of a number of pro-democracy activists, the former legislator Ted Hui being one example. And so to have on the one hand HSBC going after pro-democracy activists at the instigation of the authorities, and on the other hand, banks in Hong Kong being involved in criminal money transfers into Canada, it sounds a really bad kind of contradiction, especially if the authorities are turning a blind eye to it. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, this is something that that came out of the BC Anti-Money Laundering Commission, a very good case study that there's two parts to what I want to say. Before I get into the case study, this BC Cullen Commission has found that Canada's financial intelligence watchdog, FinTrack, was completely ineffective in stopping vast money laundering into British Columbia. And by extension, and we can extrapolate or safely infer that if they're not stopping it in British Columbia, they're not stopping it across Canada, which would mean, Toronto, Montreal. And we know that Vancouver and Toronto have deep banking connections, deep people connections to the population of Hong Kong. Masses of money have, some of it great money, some of it honorable money, a lot of it, unfortunately, criminal money routed through from China, or routed from around the world, really, from some narco states into Hong Kong, into corrupted entities, and then coming to Canada. So what this case study in the BC Money Laundering Inquiry revealed was, as I describe it, my work started with uncovering this just massive criminal underground bank in Vancouver that was estimated by authorities to be laundering at least $1 billion per year in connection to this casino activity, which the model is wealthy businessmen from China would travel to Vancouver. This criminal, essentially drug bank, where drug traffickers, fentanyl traffickers deposited the cash they earned. This cash was lent out by high-level transnational crime loan sharks to the wealthy businessmen from China. So this was a very cash-based drug money laundering cleaning activity. The casino gamblers would pay the gangsters back in China, and this would facilitate the loop of those fentanyl proceeds and money capital flying from China. Where does this fit into banks? This new case study showed that the mirror, as I describe it, in Hong Kong is a number of other currency exchanges also connected to the high-level triads with Chinese state connections. And they were found to be wiring proceeds from, in one case study, another People's Liberation Army massive corruption case. The gentleman and his daughter were found to have bought 30 million in Vancouver properties. And follow me, I'm almost to the point here. This case study found, how did they get their money into Canada? It didn't involve this street cash or casino gambling in Vancouver. It involved deposits with the criminal currency exchanges in Hong Kong that are wired directly into Big Five Canadian banks in British Columbia. So you can see how this loop is not only, the Vancouver model is not just cash, it is banking or lower level financial institutions in Hong Kong feed the money up to international banks, and it can be wired into our Canadian banks. And of course, it's happening in other countries. And we have the impression that our banks are fairly strongly regulated against money laundering in comparison to casinos. But this case study just starts to peel off the cover and says, no, the exact same drug gangs are involved in infiltrating banks with wire transfers. And at the start, you mentioned Canadian police and FinTrack know about this. They're not doing anything. That's the information that came from my sources when this new chapter was written. A person indicated awareness of some of the very high-level suspects I point to in the book. We're talking about a handful of people. There was a report from FinTrack that showed over $1 billion in perhaps about 2 years from these individuals being wired from Hong Kong into Canada. And so I wrote that, and now the BC Commission has confirmed that FinTrack knows about this activity, but nothing is happening.
It's extraordinary, that. So a penultimate question. What has been the impact of the book and its revelations? And even though you say that people in Canada are not doing what they should be doing to address these issues, are people in government and outside government at least starting to wake up as a result of what you reveal?
Well, I've been informed of the impact on a number of politicians have credited the work in Canada. They have said that this is a groundbreaking book that does add to the global research on this really top-level international threat of the Chinese Communist Party's plans and their methods, which include using and working with the worst, the most powerful criminals in the world. I would underline that by saying in the new chapter, I write about this concept of Vladimir Putin's use of hybrid warfare, incorporating kleptocracy and organized crime, and how Putin uses oligarchs and how he paved the way through post-Soviet states in hybrid war that has now come to kinetic, or to drop that technical phrasing, dropping bombs on citizens in Ukraine. This is the same problem that that on the hybrid war side has already captured Hong Kong, and on the kinetic war side threatens Taiwan. So I believe that the book does add to the international research that shows how China's plans are being enacted, and the threat level is beyond belief. So in Washington, in Canberra, in London, people in government and people that advise government are reading the book, and they're telling me that there is more to learn, but the book has added to their knowledge, and it should have its political impact. As I've said, we already know it has had some impact in Beijing. At some level, the party and their intelligence apparatus is concerned that this is shedding light on their campaigns, such as the hybrid disinformation attack on Kenny Chiu and Canada's opposition party. That leads me to the next observation. As I said, this very serious attack on Canada's opposition party, it doesn't appear has registered in Canada's parliament, or that the seriousness has registered with the sitting Liberal government. This leads to concerning questions. If the Liberal government is indirectly benefiting from China's hybrid attacks on Canada's political system, does it have the will to address that? Or could this be another case of willful blindness that leads to objectives for a powerful elite? And so that's a concern that I think my last chapter paves the way, that this is something that Canadian citizens and politicians of all stripes need to think about. I would add right here that it's not just the Liberal Party, although this is the most infiltrated Canadian political body by far by the Chinese Communist Party. The Conservative leadership campaign, there are very clear indications now that the United Front is trying to get its hooks into one or more of the candidates running for Conservative opposition party leadership. We know in the United Kingdom, as I write, that MI5 did a outstanding and stunning alert about how the party, the United Front, and the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office has attacked Britain's parliament, and especially your powerful Conservative Party has been approached. So I would end by saying that I know in Canada, both my people inside intelligence and law enforcement say that the book has brought to light issues that are top level foreign policy and domestic policy concerns of Canada that need to be addressed. And there are some MPs, and I'm thinking of one opposition member that has brought forward a private member's bill on anti-money laundering for the national stage that is informed and impacted by willful blindness. And so that shows that at Canada's center of power, the powers that be are looking at the work and are understanding that it needs to lead to some legislative reform.
Mm. Well, that's definitely good to know, even if it's somewhat late in the day. One final question: you've said a number of times that Beijing has certainly taken notice of the book, that they're investigating you and your publishers. Have you had anything more than that in terms of reaction from Beijing, in terms of threats, harassment? I mean, is your own security a concern now?
Well, that's a question that I always, when I turn my mind to, I think about risks. I know that if I'm at danger, or if I should not travel somewhere, I've been informed directly that based on willful blindness's impact, I cannot travel to Hong Kong. I cannot travel to mainland China, which is a big shame, a big disappointment for me, because I dearly wanted to visit both places. I might not be able to travel to other countries where Chinese intelligence is very active, such as Taiwan. So that's an impact. I don't know that I've ever received a direct safety threat. I do know that if danger is there, I have advice. I can get advice from people inside law enforcement or intelligence on how I should respond. I do know that I've been subject, as you have, of state-sponsored disinformation attacks, smears, I haven't been sanctioned yet officially, but as I've said, I cannot travel to certain areas because Beijing has taken notice. I do pay attention to the security of myself, my friends, my sources, and anyone involved on this very, very important file.
Absolutely. Well, there's so many more things that we could discuss, but I think we've come to the end of the time for this conversation. All I would say to viewers and listeners is, if you haven't already read it, I highly recommend Wilful Blindness. I think it's an incredibly important book, not just for Canada, but I think for all of us in the free world, because to varying degrees, we all face the same challenge, and I think we can all learn lessons from what's revealed in Willful Blindness. So, Sam Cooper, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to your book coming out soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, it'll be out in October with the same publishers. So more on that later. But thank you so much.
Thank you.